positive pregnancy test trembled in her plump hands. She, the invisible, overweight secretary, was carrying the heir to Chicago's most ruthless syndicate. Before she could flush it, the door splintered open. Lorenzo's dark eyes locked onto the plastic stick. "Like it or not, you're staying that baby is mine, hack." In the high-stakes, hyper-masculine world of the Chicago underworld, anonymity is a currency more valuable than gold. Samantha Higgins had a natural gift for it, though not by choice. At 29 years old and wearing a size 22, Samantha was acutely aware of how the world saw her. Slow, maternal, entirely unthreatening, and ultimately invisible. She didn't possess the sharp, manufactured beauty of the mob wives who haunted the VIP lounges, nor did she have the sleek, predatory look of the corporate lawyers who handled the family's legitimate fronts. She wore sensible, wide-cut navy blazers, comfortable orthotic flats, and kept her thick auburn hair pulled into a severe, no-nonsense bun. To society, she was a stout, forgettable woman. To Lorenzo Moretti, she was the absolute backbone of his empire. Lorenzo was the head of Paramount Holdings, a glittering corporate facade that laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for the Moretti syndicate. He was 34, carved from Sicilian marble, with eyes like chipped flint and a reputation that made grown men stutter in his presence. He was ruthless, immaculate, and demanded terrifying perfection. Secretaries usually lasted less than a month under his reign, breaking under the crushing weight of his demands or fleeing when they saw too much. Samantha had lasted 4 years. She survived because she understood her role perfectly. She was the furniture. She organized his illicit ledgers, managed the payoffs to the precinct captains, and scheduled his brutal sit-downs with rival bosses without ever batting an eye. Lorenzo valued her efficiency, but he never actually looked at her. She was just Higgins, a machine that kept his life running smoothly. Or so she thought. The shift in their universe happened on a storm-battered night in late November. It was past 11 p.m. The Paramount Holdings skyscraper was a glass monolith towering over the rain-slicked streets of the Loop. Samantha was working late in the outer office, meticulously double-checking a cargo manifest for a shipment of unregistered firearms coming through the docks. Lorenzo was in his executive suite, nursing a scotch and reviewing the numbers. The first sign of trouble wasn't an alarm. It was the sudden, deafening shatter of reinforced blasts. The Russo crew arrival faction looking to decapitate the Moretti family had bypassed the lobby security. 3 men with suppressed submachine guns kicked through the frosted glass doors of the executive floor. Samantha didn't scream. Years of proximity to violence had trained the panic out of her. She dove beneath her heavy oak desk as the drywall above her disintegrated in a hail of bullets. Through the chaos, she heard a heavy thud from Lorenzo's office, followed by a sharp, guttural curse. "He's hit." Adrenaline surged through her veins, overriding her deep-seated insecurities. Samantha crawled through the debris, her stout frame moving with surprising agility, and pushed into his office. Lorenzo was slumped behind his mahogany desk, one hand clutching a massive bleeding wound in his left side, his custom-tailored suit jacket soaked in dark crimson. He had managed to shoot 2 of the assassins, their bodies motionless on the carpet, but more footsteps were echoing down the hall. "Higgins," Lorenzo rasped, his usually commanding voice tight with agony. "Get out of here." "Shut up, Mr. Moretti," Samantha snapped, surprising both of them. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed him by his uninjured arm, using her significant weight and strength to haul him to his feet. People often mistook her size for weakness, but she was solid, grounded, and immensely strong. She threw his heavy arm over her broad shoulders, bearing the brunt of his dead weight, and practically dragged him toward the hidden panel behind the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. She slammed her hand against the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door of the safe room slid open. She shoved him inside just as the third assassin rounded the corner, the door hissing shut and locking with a heavy metallic thud, sealing them in absolute darkness before the emergency red lights flickered on. The sink room was a cramped 10 by 10 titanium box. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the scent of Lorenzo's expensive sandalwood cologne. "Let me see," Samantha commanded, dropping to her knees beside him on the cold steel floor. Lorenzo gritted his teeth as she unbuttoned his ruined shirt. The bullet had grazed his ribs deep enough to bleed profusely, but it hadn't hit an organ. Her hands, usually plucking at keyboards or filing folders, were steady as she rips the hem of her own blouse to create a makeshift pressure bandage. She pressed her weight into his side to staunch the bleeding. For a long moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Lorenzo looked down at her, really looked at her. Her hair had fallen out of its severe bun, framing her flushed, round face in wild auburn waves. Her dark eyes were fierce, completely devoid of the submission he was so used to. She was soft, warm, and currently the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "You didn't run," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, the pain in his eyes suddenly replaced by something entirely different. Something dark and burning. "Someone has to manage your schedule tomorrow." She deflected, her heart hammering against her ribs. He reached out, his blood-stained hand gently cupping her jaw. The touch sent a violent jolt of electricity down her spine. No man had touched her like that in years. Certainly not a man like him. "Samantha," he breathed. It was the first time in 4 years he had ever used her first name. The adrenaline of surviving a near-death experience is a potent, dangerous drug. The absolute terror of the gunfire, the claustrophobic intimacy of the red-lit room, and the sudden, raw vulnerability between them stripped away all the rules. He pulled her down. It wasn't a gentle, romantic embrace. It was desperate, bruising, and primal. They crashed together in the shadows of the safe room, an explosion of heat and suppressed tension. For Samantha, the invisible, heavy woman who would spend her life fading into the background, being wanted with such sudden, ravenous intensity, was intoxicating. She yielded to the darkness, letting the mob boss consume her, feeling for one stolen hour, wildly and dangerously alive. The magic of the safe room died the moment the sun rose. By 6 a.m., Lorenzo's capos had breached the floor, neutralized the remaining threat, and extracted them. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the emergency response, Lorenzo was completely back in his element. His face was a mask of cold granite as the syndicate doctor stitched his side. Samantha stood awkwardly in the corner, clutching her ruined blouse around her chest, suddenly acutely aware of her size, her messy hair, and the absurdity of what had just happened. She was the fat secretary again. He was the untouchable king of Chicago. Lorenzo buttoned a fresh shirt his men had brought him. He stopped in front of her, his expression utterly unreadable. "You did well last night, Higgins. A bonus will be wired to your account." He adjusted his cuffs, not meeting her eyes. "As for the rest, we're professionals. It was the adrenaline. It doesn't happen again." Samantha swallowed the sharp, jagged lump forming in her throat. She nodded once, her face burning with humiliation. "Of course, Mr. Moretti. I'll get started on the damage report for the office." She walked away, forcing her shoulders back. She had survived worse heartbreaks. She would do her job, keep her head down, and bury the memory in the deepest vault of her mind. 6 weeks passed. November bled into a freezing, brutal January. The syndicate was at war, and the office was a pressure cooker of tension. But Samantha was fighting a different, much more terrifying internal battle. It started with a bone-deep exhaustion that she couldn't shake. Then it was the smell of Lorenzo's dark roast espresso. The scent she had brewed for him every morning for years, suddenly made her violently nauseous. At first, she chalked it up to stress. Then she blamed her weight, assuming it was a hormonal imbalance or a thyroid issue. She was nearly 30, maybe her body was just changing. But when her cycle was 3 weeks late, a creeping, icy dread settled in her stomach. On a frigid Tuesday afternoon, while Lorenzo was locked in a 3-hour sit-down with his lieutenants, Samantha slipped out of the building. She walked 2 blocks to a busy downtown pharmacy and bought 3 different brands of pregnancy tests, hiding them at the bottom of her oversized leather tote bag. Back on the executive floor, she locked herself in the private, marble-tiled restroom attached to the boardroom. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the cardboard boxes. It's impossible, she told herself, staring at her pale, round reflection in the vanity mirror. It was one time, one stupid, careless time. She took the tests, lined them up on the sink, and set a timer on her phone for 3 minutes. She paced the length of the small room, biting her nails, her chest tight with panic. If she was pregnant, she was dead, or worse, the baby was dead. Lorenzo Moretti didn't have a family. He didn't have weaknesses. A bastard child with a stout, unremarkable secretary would be a stain on his legacy, a vulnerability his enemies would exploit in a heartbeat. He would force her to get rid of it. The timer chimed. It sounded like a death knell. Samantha approached the sink. Test 1. 2 pink lines. Test 2. A solid plus sign. Test 3. The digital screen screamed pregnant in bold, mocking letters. A ragged sob tore from her throat. Her knees buckled beneath her heavy frame, and she sank to the cool tile floor, her back against the door. She picked up the plastic stick, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. She was ruined. Her quiet and visible life was over. She was so consumed by her panic that she didn't hear the heavy oak door of the boardroom open. She didn't hear the heavy footsteps approaching the bathroom. The doorknob rattled. Samantha froze, her breath catching in her throat. The test slipped from her trembling fingers and skidded across the smooth marble floor, sliding right underneath the small gap between the door and the frame. Higgins? Lorenzo's voice boomed through the wood, sharp and impatient. Why is this door locked? I need the files on the Russo properties. Samantha scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering wildly. I'll be right out, Mr. Moretti. Just a moment. She frantically tried to compose herself, wiping the tears from her cheeks, but before she could reach for the door handle, the silence on the other side became deafening. Lorenzo had looked down. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany door shuddered violently as a massive weight slammed against it. Samantha shrieked and jumped back. Before she could process what was happening, Lorenzo kicked the door again, the heavy deadbolt splintering the doorframe. The door burst open, slamming against the tiled wall. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. The sheer, terrifying aura of the mafia boss radiated off him in dark waves. He wasn't looking at her face. His dark, predatory eyes were locked onto the plastic stick he had picked up from the floor. He slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping over her terrified, tear-stained face, down to her plush stomach hidden beneath her oversized blazer. "Mr. Moretti, please," Samantha whimpered, backing up until her spine hit the cool mirror. "I can fix this. I'll leave. I'll resign today. You'll never have to see me again, I swear." "Shut your mouth," he commanded. The tone wasn't angry, it was dangerously, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used right before he ordered a hit. He stepped into the bathroom, closing the splintered door behind him, trapping her. He stalked toward her, invading her space until she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. He reached out, his large, rough hand suddenly gripping her waist, pulling her solid frame flush against his hard chest. The touch wasn't professional. It was entirely possessive. "You think you can run from me?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. "You think you can take my blood, my air, and just disappear into the city? I don't fit in your world," she cried, gesturing to her stout figure. "Look at me, Lorenzo. I'm your secretary. I'm a liability." "You're the mother of my child," he corrected, his grip tightening on her waist, almost bruising her. "Like it or not, you're staying. That baby is mine. And what is mine, I protect." He didn't give her another second to argue. Lorenzo pulled his phone from his pocket and hit a speed dial. "Ring the armored SUV to the private garage," he barked into the receiver. "Send a crew to Higgins' apartment on 4th Street. Pack everything she owns." "She doesn't live there anymore." "Lorenzo, wait." Samantha gasped, grabbing his lapel. "You can't just— You belong to the family now, Samantha," he interrupted, his dark eyes flashing with a terrifying, obsessive fire that made her blood run cold. "You are moving to the Lake Forest estate. You will be guarded 24 hours a day. You will not drive, you will not work, and you will not leave my sight." Within an hour, Samantha Higgins, the invisible wallflower of Paramount Holdings, was strapped into the back of a bulletproof Escalade. As the city's skyline faded behind them, replaced by the sprawling iron-gated mansions of Lake Forest, Samantha touched her stomach. She realized with a chilling certainty that the real danger wasn't the rival mobs trying to kill the Moretti boss. The real danger was the suffocating, inescapable cage her boss had just built around her. The Lake Forest estate was a sprawling 20-acre compound off Sheridan Road, hidden behind wrought iron gates and ancient towering oaks. To the outside world, it was a monument to old money. To Samantha, it was a gilded, high-security prison, a transition from an invisible corporate drone to the heavily guarded incubator for the Moretti heir was brutal. Lorenzo had completely stripped away her autonomy. Her sensible blazers were replaced with luxurious, custom-tailored maternity dresses spun from Italian silk, draped to accommodate her stout frame and growing belly. She was assigned a personal chef, a high-end obstetrician who made house calls, and 2 massive bodyguards, Arthur and Dominic, who shadowed her every move. Yet for all the lavish treatment, Lorenzo remained a phantom. He visited the estate late at night, his expensive suit smelling of cigar smoke and gunpowder, looking exhausted. He would place a heavy, possessive hand on her swelling stomach, ask if she needed anything, and then retreat to his study. He treated her like a priceless Fabergé egg, terrified she would crack, but he refused to let her back into the loop of the syndicate. "I'm losing my mind," Samantha told him one evening in late April, her hands resting on her 5-month pregnant belly. They were sitting in the cavernous, formal dining room. "I need something to do. Let me look over the waterfront acquisition files. I know the shell companies better than your new assistant does." Lorenzo didn't look up from his steak. "Your job is to rest, Samantha. The stress isn't good for the baby. Boredom is going to kill me faster than stress," she snapped, a sudden spark of defiance cutting through her usual submission. "I am fat, Lorenzo, not brain dead. I managed your entire criminal empire for 4 years. Don't relegate me to a helpless broodmare." He finally looked up, his dark eyes narrowing. The sheer disrespect would have gotten any of his capos shot. But coming from her, her round cheeks flushed with anger, it ignited a strange, fierce heat in his chest. "You want to be useful. Plan the nursery. I won't have you anywhere near syndicate business." But Samantha wasn't one to simply obey. If she couldn't manage his legitimate fronts, she would manage her new environment. The estate was governed by a complex web of logistics, security rotations, food deliveries, groundskeeping schedules. To pass the time, Samantha started doing what she did best, analyzing patterns. She persuaded one of the younger guards to leave an iPad unlocked, claiming she wanted to order specific craving-satisfying pastries from the bakery in the loop. Instead, she quietly accessed the estate's internal network. Within 2 weeks, her sharp administrative eye caught a terrifying discrepancy. It was subtle, something a security chief relying on muscle rather than spreadsheets would miss. Every Thursday, a private waste disposal truck serviced the compound. But according to the encrypted server logs Samantha had sifted through, the security cameras on the west gate experienced a rolling, 60-second maintenance blackout exactly when that truck arrived. Furthermore, the guard rotation for that specific hour was always shifted, placing 2 rookies at the gate while the senior men were inexplicably reassigned to the east wing. Someone inside the house was orchestrating a blind spot. Samantha dug deeper, her heart pounding against her ribs. She cross-referenced the active IP addresses on the guest network and traced the administrative overrides back to a specific device. The device belonged to Vanessa Moretti. Vanessa was the widow of Lorenzo's older brother, a sharp-featured, icy socialite who lived in the estate's guest house. She had always viewed Samantha with unconcealed disgust, treating her like the hired help who had tragically fallen upward. Vanessa had expected her own teenage son to eventually take over the syndicate. Lorenzo producing an heir was a direct threat to her bloodline's claim to the throne. Samantha didn't hesitate. She waddled down the massive marble hallway toward Lorenzo's private study, bypassing Arthur and Dominic with a sharp command she had learned from mimicking Lorenzo. She burst through the heavy mahogany doors. Lorenzo was nursing a glass of bourbon, poring over a map of the shipping docks. He looked up, his jaw clenching. "Samantha, what did I say about shut up and look at this?" she ordered, dropping the iPad onto the map. He blinked, taken aback by her sheer audacity. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the spreadsheets, timestamps, and highlighted security logs she had meticulously compiled. "Vanessa is manipulating the West Gate security feeds," Samantha said, her voice trembling but resolute. "She's creating a 1-minute blind spot every Thursday at 3 p.m. Today is Thursday. It's 2:45 p.m., Lorenzo. I think she's smuggling someone or something inside." Lorenzo's expression hardened into a terrifying mask of pure violence. He didn't dismiss her. He knew her brain was a steel trap. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a heavy Glock 19, and racked the slide. "Arthur!" Lorenzo roared, his voice echoing through the mansion. "Lock down the estate. Nobody gets in or out." The lockdown order came exactly 12 minutes too late. Before Arthur could engage the heavy steel barricades on the west gate, a massive reinforced garbage truck slammed through the wrought iron barrier, tearing it off its hinges. The truck didn't stop, plowing over the pristine rose gardens until it crashed into the side of the west wing. The back doors of the truck blew open, and a dozen heavily armed mercenaries belonging to the Russo family poured out. The betrayal was absolute. Vanessa hadn't just smuggled weapons, she had sold the estate's vulnerabilities to Lorenzo's deadliest rivals. Alarm shrieked through the mansion, a deafening, pulsating red siren. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the west wing, tearing through the expensive art and ancient plaster. "Move!" Lorenzo grabbed Samantha's arm, shoving her behind his broad frame. "We have to get to the panic room in the basement." "No!" Samantha yelled over the gunfire, her mind racing. "The basement routes are compromised. If Vanessa planned this, she disabled the biometric locks on the safe room. It'll be a death trap." Lorenzo hesitated for a fraction of a second, his tactical mind warring with his instinct to protect. "Then where?" "The server room," she breathed heavily, clutching her stomach as a sharp cramp seized her. "It has reinforced steel doors and an independent ventilation system to protect the mainframes, and I can access the estate's smart grid from there." They bolted down the opposite corridor, moving as fast as Samantha's heavy, pregnant frame would allow. Bullets chewed into the marble pillars behind them, raining sharp fragments of stone onto their shoulders. Lorenzo turned, firing 3 precise shots that dropped the closest Russo mercenary before shoving Samantha into the server room and throwing his weight against the heavy steel door. He threw the manual deadbolt just as heavy fists and boots began pounding against the outside. "They'll blow the lock in less than 5 minutes," Lorenzo gritted out, reloading his weapon, his eyes blazing with a feral protective rage as he looked at her. "Get behind the mainframes. If the door breaches, keep your head down." "I am not hiding," Samantha said, a cold clinical calm washing over her. She wasn't an assassin, but she was the ultimate administrator, and this house was just a very large, very deadly computer system. She dropped heavily into the rolling chair in front of the primary server terminal. Her thick fingers flew across the keyboard with blinding speed. She bypassed the compromised main network and accessed the estate's localized smart home environment. "What are you doing?" Lorenzo asked, staring at her in shock. "Vanessa disabled the security, but she didn't touch the environmental controls," Samantha muttered, her eyes locked on the glowing screens. "I'm locking the blast doors in the west and north corridors. I'm trapping them in the grand foyer." With a few keystrokes, the sound of heavy hydraulic doors slamming shut echoed through the mansion's walls. The mercenaries in the hallway outside the server room yelled in confusion as the blast doors sealed them in. "Now what?" Lorenzo asked, a dark smirk forming on his lips, suddenly realizing the terrifying brilliance of the woman he had impregnated. "Now," Samantha said, her voice devoid of mercy, "we turn on the automated halon gas fire suppression system in the grand foyer. It's designed to suffocate chemical fires by removing oxygen." She hit the enter key. Through the security feeds on her monitor, they watched as thick white halon gas deployed from the ceiling of the sealed foyer. The trapped Russo mercenaries began to choke, dropping their weapons and clawing at their throats as the oxygen was sucked from the room. Within 2 minutes, the feed showed a dozen unconscious bodies sprawled across the imported marble floor. The mansion fell dead silent, save for the hum of the servers. Lorenzo slowly lowered his weapon. He looked from the security monitors to the stout, disheveled woman sitting in the glow of the screens. Her hair was a mess. Her silk maternity dress was torn, and she was heavily panting. She had never looked more magnificent. The door to the server room beeped. The surviving loyal guards had cleared the perimeter. "Mr. Moretti," Arthur's voice came through the intercom. "The threat is neutralized. We have Vanessa secured in the courtyard." Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He walked over to Samantha, placing his hands on the armrests of her chair, trapping her against the console. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. The possessive fire in his eyes had transformed into something much deeper. Absolute, unadulterated reverence. "You saved my life again," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our child. You saved my empire." "I told you," she breathed, her heart hammering wildly. "I manage your life, Lorenzo. It's my job." "No," he corrected softly, pressing a fierce, claiming kiss to her forehead, then down to her lips. "You are not my secretary, Samantha. You never were. You are the only person strong enough to stand beside me." He pulled her to her feet, his arm wrapping securely around her thick waist. "Come with me. We have a traitor to deal with, and then I am putting a ring on your finger." When they walked out into the courtyard, the remaining syndicate soldiers stood at strict attention among the smoke and debris. Vanessa was on her knees, bruised and terrified, but Lorenzo didn't look at his sister-in-law. He looked at his men, then gestured to the heavy, imposing woman standing proudly by his side, her hand resting on the future of the Moretti family. "Look at her," Lorenzo commanded the courtyard, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "This is Samantha Moretti. She is the mother of my heir, and the undisputed queen of this syndicate. Anyone who disrespects her, questions her size, or looks at her with anything less than absolute loyalty will answer to me." Samantha stood tall, leaning into his strength but anchored by her own. She was no longer the invisible wallflower of Chicago. She had built her own throne, and like it or not, she was there to stay. If you loved this thrilling mafia romance filled with jaw-dropping twists, fierce loyalty, and a heroine who proves true power comes from within, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow drama addicts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our next steamy underworld adventure. Comment below, what would you have done?